applications, I'd make the approval process really easy and just give us
share an excellent working relationship. A teenage girl has told the High Court she ran away after being beaten by her boss, but was recaptured, her hands were tied up and she was put in a storeroom. Joseph Matamata is on trial in Napier, facing 24 charges of human trafficking and slavery between 1994 and 2017, involving 13 people. The Crown prosecutor told the jury in Napier the 15-year-old was brought to New Zealand on the promise that she'd attend school in Hastings, but instead she became Mr Matamata's slave. Clayton Walker said the girl fled to Auckland after one of Mr Matamata's beatings, but he tracked her down.
And he did bring her back by car with her hands and wrists tied as she was in the back of the car. And then she was placed in the storeroom for the night.
Crown prosecutor Clayton Walker. Taika Waititi has won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay for his movie Jojo Rabbit. In his speech, he dedicated the award to the original storytellers.
This is really great, and I dedicate this to all the Indigenous kids in the world who want to do art and dance and write stories. We are the original storytellers, and we can make it here as well. Thank you. Kia ora.
Film director Taika Waititi. The 92nd Academy Awards, held in the Dolby Theatre in Los Angeles, have just seen Elton John and Bernie Taupin win for Best Original Song for I'm Gonna Love Me Again from Rocket Man. Parasite, the South Korean thriller, has had a successful evening, winning Best International Film, with Bong Joon-ho also winning Best Director. Best Picture, for which Jojo Rabbit is also nominated, has not yet been awarded. The Prime Minister says she is determined that New Zealand will not lose RNZ concert on FM. Jacinda Ardern says Cabinet today discussed what would have to be done to avoid that happening. She's already expressed her frustration at RNZ pushing ahead with announcing proposed changes when the government had asked for time to discuss alternatives. RNZ is planning to take the classical music station off the FM frequency and replace it with a new station aimed at reaching a wider, younger audience. A new Cabinet paper will look at what would be involved in freeing up the 102 FM frequency, which Ms Ardern says has been shelved for the last 20 years for the purpose of providing youth-targeted programming. Train commuters are being warned to expect further disruptions to services as repairs on a burnt electric signal continue. South Aucklanders face delays of about half an hour during rush hour this morning. Israel Email reports.
KiwiRail says trains will not run between Newmarket and Penrose while the signal cabinet is being replaced. It is advising people to check with Auckland Transport for bus replacements or the rail shuttle. The electrical equipment in the signal cabinet is being replaced due to smoke and water damage. Trains from Otahuhu to Britomart are being redirected through the Eastern Line, while those on the Western Line continue to run through Newmarket. An investigation into the cause of the fire continues. Ko Israel Hell, Tēnei.
It's 5 minutes past. The White Ferns have clinched the T20 series against South Africa after a magnificent century from captain Sophie Devine. It was Devine's first century at the international T20 level, and she did it at her home ground, Wellington's Basin Reserve. The White Ferns made 171 for 2. They then bowled South Africa out for 102 after 17 overs. The Black Caps' fast bowler Hamish Bennett says enthusiasm has allowed an inexperienced seam attack to rise to the occasion in the ODI series against India. New Zealand is currently without 3 frontline seamers, with Trent Boult, Matt Henry and Lockie Ferguson yet to return from injury. Despite that, the Black Caps have won the first 2 one-dayers to clinch the series. Bennett says the likes of he and Kyle Jamieson are simply keen to take their opportunity.
The energy and the fizz levels aren't an issue. It's probably just trying to control that and just trying to execute as much as we can, and we've done that pretty well in these last 2 games. And I don't think we're that far off in the T20s either. We just probably need that little bit of luck, and fortunately throughout this one-day series, probably luck's been on our side.
Hamish Bennett, the third and final one-dayer against India, is tomorrow in Mount Maunganui. Nick Taylor has won the Pebble Beach Pro-Am by 4 strokes in California to become the first Canadian to win the event. A 2 under par 70 was enough to fend off Phil Mickelson in the process of becoming the event's first wire-to-wire winner since Mickelson 15 years ago. Taylor finished at 19 under, 268 for his second PGA Tour victory. That's the news.
Curtailing the spread.
It is still possible that we won't see cases in New Zealand, but it's very unlikely.
conflict over concert.
I am going to express a little bit of frustration here, if I may.
Future, as that battle has turned up a notch. More on that shortly. But first, Taika Waititi has won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay for his World War II comedy Jojo Rabbit. The film was nominated for 6 awards in total, but has so far missed out on Best Supporting Actress for Scarlett Johansson, Best Production Design, Best Film Editing and Costume Design. Winners so far include Brad Pitt for Best Supporting Actor, Laura Dern for Best Supporting Actress and Best Screenplay to the South Korean thriller Parasite. Harry Locke has been following along.
And the Oscar goes to Taika Waititi, Jojo Rabbit.
On the biggest night in Hollywood, it was a winning night for Taika Waititi.
Thank you. Amazing. Thank you.
Jojo Rabbit, adapted from Belgian-New Zealand author Christine Loonen's novel Caging Skies, tells the story of a brainwashed 10-year-old coming to terms with morality as he grows up in Nazi Germany. Thanking his mum, his wife Chelsea Winstanley and Loonen's, Waititi went on to dedicate the award to the original storytellers.
This is really great, and I dedicate this to all the Indigenous kids in the world who want to do art and dance and write stories. We are the original storytellers, and we can make it here as well. Thank you. Kia ora.
Jojo Rabbit was nominated for 5 other awards in total, but currently it's lost out in 4. With Best Picture, however, there could be more celebrations for New Zealanders. Waititi is nominated in the category for Jojo Rabbit alongside Winstanley, who was the first Indigenous female producer to be nominated, as well as Carthew Neal. 4 other New Zealanders were up for Oscars, although Waititi's win meant New Plymouth-born Anthony McCartan, the screenwriter behind The Two Popes, missed out. It was unfortunately also a miss for Matt Aitken, who was nominated in the visual effects category for Avengers Endgame.
Tonight we celebrate all the amazing talent in this room. We celebrate all the women who directed phenomenal films. And I'm so proud to stand here as a black, queer artist telling stories.
In Los Angeles Dolby Theatre, the 92nd ceremony was hostless for the 2nd year in a row. With Janelle Monáe putting on a musical bonanza to kick it off, it was up to Steve Martin and Chris Rock to provide the comic relief.
You know, I was thinking today, Chris, that we both have hosted the Oscars before, and this is such an incredible demotion. They don't really have hosts anymore. Why is that? Twitter!
Amid the usual high-budget musical performances, including an international cast of Elsas from Frozen, as well as Eminem performing Lose Yourself from 8 Mile, there was also a good amount of humour from award presenters. Trust James Corden and Rebel Wilson to provide some silliness as they walked onto the stage dressed up in cat onesies.
As cast members of the motion picture Cats,
nobody more than us understands the importance of good visual effects.
In other awards, Brad Pitt took home his first acting award, winning Best Supporting Actor for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, while Laura Dern won Best Supporting Actress for Marriage Story.
And you know, some say, never meet your heroes, but I say if you're really blessed, you get them as your parents. I share this with my acting heroes, my legends, Diane Ladd and Bruce Dern.
But with the biggest awards still to come, there's plenty still to look out for. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
And speaking of the big ones, Joaquin Phoenix has just won Best Actor for his role in The Joker. The Prime Minister has made it clear she will fight to keep RNZ concert on an FM frequency rather. Jacinda Ardern says she's frustrated RNZ pushed ahead with announcing proposed changes to its concert radio station when the government had asked for time to discuss alternatives. RNZ is proposing to remove concert from its FM frequencies and transform it into an automated non-stop music station which will stream online and play on AM radio. Our political reporter Jo Moyer has the story.
At her weekly post-cabinet press conference, Jacinda Ardern announced an alternative plan would be drawn up in a cabinet paper to be presented to ministers. It would involve freeing up the 102 FM frequency, a spectrum for youth programming that has been shelved for the last 20 years.
In the meantime, we believe Radio New Zealand has New Zealand On Air funding obligations to continue programming until June, and we intend to use the time available to work constructively to find a solution.
RNZ is planning to take the classical music station off the FM frequency and replace it with a new station aimed at reaching a wider, younger audience. Earlier today, RNZ defended the proposed changes, saying it's taking public feedback into account and continuing to consult, but argues the station isn't closing down, only moving to different platforms. RNZ says it cannot meet its charter obligations as a public service broadcaster without broadening the diversity of its audiences. But Ms Ardern argues one program doesn't need to come at the cost of the other.
When the Minister for Broadcasting was briefed very recently on some of the proposed changes, he expressed concerns, and one of his clear concerns was over the loss of the FM frequency for concert. He explicitly asked the time so that we could see whether or not there was something we could do to prevent the loss of the FM frequency for concert.
Government sources have told RNZ Broadcasting Minister Chris Farfoy met with RNZ Chief Executive Paul Thompson and board members a couple of weeks ago to discuss the proposal. It's understood the minister's main issue was with the shift away from the FM frequency, and he asked those in the meeting to hold off making any decisions or announcements until some further work had been done on alternatives. The Minister asked for time for officials to explore other options, work that the Prime Minister plans to plough ahead with. It's understood the Minister met with Mr Thompson again last week and expressed his unhappiness with how things have played out. Mr Thompson has not yet responded to questions about the meetings. As for a new program, would the younger audience it's targeting actually tune in?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I'll give it a little listen, but I'm kind of more into the old bangers and stuff.
I mean, I'd give it a go, I'd give it a listen.
Possibly. Maybe. Yeah, that sounds cool.
RNZ planned for concert to be taken off FM radio on May the 29th and phase the new program in ahead of its full launch on August the 28th. The move would eliminate 17 jobs at RNZ Music, including all concert presenter roles, from late March. It draws in an audience of approximately 173,000 people a week, and amongst those who tune in are some vocal critics. None have been more vocal than former Prime Minister Helen Clark, who has taken to social media to fight RNZ Concert's case. Another politician that has weighed in is former Attorney General Chris Finlayson, who is one of 3 lawyers mounting a legal challenge to stop changes going ahead. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
And RNZ CEO Paul Thompson and Head of Music Content Willie McAllister declined to be interviewed. And in the past hour, we have tried also to reach the RNZ Board Chairman, Jim Mather, for comment, but he has yet to respond. And as Jo mentioned in her story, a group of prominent lawyers is preparing a legal challenge to Radio New Zealand's proposed changes to Concert FM. The lawyers are working on behalf of orchestras who want to stop RNZ reallocating Concert FM's frequency to a new youth-oriented music channel. Former Culture and Heritage Minister Chris Finlayson QC is one of those involved in the legal action and joins me now. Good evening, Mr Finlayson. So do you think this proposal is dead in the water given the Prime Minister's comments?
I certainly hope so. And in commenting this afternoon, I'm not commenting as a lawyer, but as a person who's very involved in the arts. I'm Deputy Chair of Chamber Music New Zealand. I'm on the Adam Foundation. I'm on the Archibald Baxter Memorial Trust, so I know arts administration pretty well. But above all, I'm talking to you as a lover of Concert FM. It is not the preserve of the Wrinklies. It is something that provides a wonderful service to all New Zealanders. And so I certainly hope that the Prime Minister will do something about it, because this is a complete stuff-up.
What about it is a stuff-up?
Well, the procedure, I mean, I can understand why Mr Mather and Mr Thompson have run for the hills, because they should be fronting up to explain their lousy process. But the second thing they need to do is they need to explain why it is that a public service broadcasting organisation is going to have some kind of ZM type channel and ditch Radio New Zealand's flagship Concert FM program, bung it on the AM network, and so it's available only when Parliament's not actually being recorded. I mean, it's pretty dopey.
But aren't young people, shouldn't they be catered to under RNZ's charter as well? That's the whole point, isn't it? Diversity.
Well, it is. That you're absolutely right. And they are being catered for with Concert FM. Let me tell you that Chamber Music New Zealand each year runs the secondary school chamber music competition. Clarissa Dunn of Radio New Zealand, who's an excellent person, is often the chair of it. The MC, and the program is wonderful outreach of classical music to young people. I think it's a fundamental flaw to think that young people are only interested in the music of Amy Winehouse rather than the music of Brahms.
But the reality is 2/3 of the listeners on Concert FM are over the age of 65.
Oh, I don't think so. Well, there are two answers to that. Why should there be ageism? So if you're over a certain age, why should you be ignored? And I'm under that age, of course. I'm just preternaturally young. But the second thing is that there is still a significant portion of the community who are under that age who enjoy Concert FM's quality work.
But Concert FM will still be available, Concert will still be available to them, streamed, digital, as you say, Parliament TV, Freeview, etc. So they'll still be able to listen to it in an AM frequency. So does it need to be saved? Because it's still available.
Well, it's still technically available, but in terms of availability for people who maybe can't access the AM network, that's a complete non-answer.
If this doesn't go your way, what are the legal options? What are the legal remedies that you can pursue?
I'm not on your program to talk as a lawyer. I'm on your program to talk, I was going to say, as an arts lovey. I'm not really. But
you are giving your legal mind to this group of people, and in terms of that, is there something entrenched in law that would prevent this going ahead?
No, you just wait and see for the legal process. Let's talk about the important music rationale for maintaining Concert FM.
Have you been involved in writing a please explain to RNZ's chief executive and the decision makers at RNZ?
No, but I understand that's underway.
And what do you know of what is the content of that letter?
I'm not commenting on any aspect of litigation or pre-litigation.
Why not?
I've told you that now twice.
Why not?
I'm speaking because they are matters that are in the realm of lawyers, and I'm speaking to you as a former culture minister.
But you are a lawyer and obviously feel so strongly about this that you are prepared to become involved in legal action.
Well,
Isn't that the case?
I've given you the answer. I've told you my position 3 times at the risk of sounding or repeating something like a litany. I'm not going to say it again.
Okay, so just before you go, if the Prime Minister is unable to secure this other frequency for the youth network and the changes are to go ahead, will you push forward with a legal challenge?
It's idle to speculate. Let us wait and see how this matter develops.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That is Chris Finlayson, who is a QC and an ardent listener of Concert FM. It is 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback as always. What do you make of the Prime Minister's comments around Concert? Would you like it to stay how it is? Or would you rather there be a youth channel on that frequency? You can text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. New Zealand First plans to review the way it handles donations. The move is hot on the heels of news the Serious Fraud Office is investigating the New Zealand First Foundation after the Electoral Commission concluded donations to it were not properly declared. The Commission began looking into its funding structure late last year after reports by RNZ and staff. In a statement, the Commission says it believes some donations to the foundation should have been treated as party donations for New Zealand First, and the donations were not properly passed on to the party or disclosed as required by law. The Commission referred the matter to the police, and the police have referred it on to the SFO. Professor Andrew Geddes, the man who wrote the book on electoral law, explains how it's come to this.
What the Electoral Commission is saying is that having reviewed the information available to them about the New Zealand First Foundation, its relationship to the New Zealand First Party, it is of the opinion, or it believes, that there is sufficient evidence to conclude that some offending has been committed against the Electoral Act, because under the Electoral Act, the Electoral Commission has a statutory duty to refer matters on to the police if it believes an offence has been committed. The fact that it's referred the matter on, therefore, speaks for itself.
What is the core issue here? Is it a question of whether the New Zealand First Party and the New Zealand First Foundation are one and the same thing, connected, or whether they're two separate entities? What is the nub of it?
So the Electoral Commission has concluded, and it says so in its release, that the donations that were given to the New Zealand First Foundation were actually party donations, donations to the New Zealand First Party under the Electoral Act. And having looked then at the way that those donations were treated, the Electoral Commission is of the belief that they haven't been treated as the Electoral Act requires, and that some form of offending will have occurred as a result. Now, exactly who's committed those offences or what those offences might be, the Commission hasn't said in its release. And, of course, it is actually up to the police, actually the Serious Fraud Office now, to decide whether offending has been committed that can be proven in court.
What is the issue with the way the donations are recorded?
Well, it appears that what happened was that the money was put into the New Zealand First Foundation's bank account and then spent from that bank account on New Zealand First Party activities. So it wasn't passed over to the New Zealand First Party and to the party secretary as the Electoral Act would require. And also the New Zealand First Party disclosure to the Electoral Commission didn't account for those donations. They didn't show up as being donations to the party as the Electoral Act would have required.
So, as you say, the Commission has referred it on to the police, and almost instantaneously the police have referred it on to the Serious Fraud Office. Why?
Two reasons, probably. One is simply the way that the police treated the donations that were given to the National Party last year. If we can cast our minds that far back, an allegation was made by Jamie Lee Ross to the police about offences that had been committed with regard to those donations. The police ultimately referred that to the Serious Fraud Office, and I suspect the police want to be seen to be treating these two issues in the same way, to avoid any sort of allegations that they're treating one more seriously than the other. The other reason, of course, is the Serious Fraud Office simply has the capacity to trace money and to trace donations through bank accounts probably more easily than the police do, which is why the police have probably chosen to give it to them.
I don't know if you've had an opportunity yet to see the statement that Winston Peters has released this afternoon. He has said in that statement that the party can confirm it will be reviewing its arrangements for party donations.
Well, that would seem to be wise, given that the party secretary and the New Zealand First Foundation, are potentially in some legal trouble here. And given that the Electoral Commission has, obviously concluded it believes that some form of offending has taken place, you would expect a political party to think very seriously about what it's doing.
But he has been pretty steadfast in saying that they've followed the letter of the law at every step.
Well, he says that. The Electoral Commission obviously thinks different.
So also the other, separate but connected development, I suppose, is yesterday, again, Winston Peters said he could no longer tolerate the mendacious attacks against the party and its supporters, and that he was reporting a massive breach of party information to the police and the Privacy Commissioner. Is that a legitimate avenue of complaint for him?
Well, he can say that if he wishes. One does wonder if that sort of language is being used to try to, distract from the fact that his political party has just been referred to the police for its, donations on the basis of this information. So, chasing the messenger, fine, but, the important thing here is the message that this sort of activity just really has no place in our democratic processes.
You have done a pretty detailed dive into the documents that have been available, and from that, what did you take away?
That I wasn't surprised at all about the Electoral Commission's decision here. Put it this way, if the Electoral Commission, after having seen those documents, had said, look, we don't think there's anything really to look at here, there's no further action needs to be taken, that would have said that our electoral laws were fundamentally broken. Because if this sort of arrangement is within the law, then all parties are free to do it, and it basically blows a complete hole in any sort of transparency, any sort of disclosure about where parties are getting money. So, as I say, having read those documents, I was not surprised the Electoral Commission took the action it did, and I'm very, very happy to see it has.
And that's Professor Andrew Geddes, who's an electoral law expert at Otago University. We did ask Winston Peters on the program, but he declined. In a statement, Mr Peters confirmed New Zealand First will be reviewing its arrangements for party donations. And the New Zealand First leader says he advised the party last week to refer the matter to the police, and it agreed to do so. He says this doesn't imply any impropriety, but is intended to ensure the party, as with all parties, have robust arrangements. Hey, in news just to hand, Renee Zellweger has won Best Actress at the Oscars. That's for her role in Judy, the Judy Garland story. And Parasite has taken away Best Film, pipping Taika Waititi at the post. It's a South Korean film, and so Taika Waititi has missed out on Best Film. Yeah. Never mind. It's been a week since rain battered Southland, causing widespread flooding and evacuations and road closures. The region has extended its state of emergency until next Tuesday as residents, businesses and councils grapple with the clean-up and the recovery effort. Tess Brunton reports.
Southland Civil Defence Controller Angus McKay says the recovery plan post-flooding is still being fleshed out.
I've got a team from all across the country, some of the people who've experienced other incidents in recent years, and they're at the moment designing what our recovery office will look like and putting together the plan on how we can transition away from response and into recovery.
While residents across Southland have returned home, the true cost of the floods for businesses and communities remains unclear. Matoda Community Garden volunteer Raymond Gilson says free veggies are on offer to flood-affected residents who are doing it tough.
We've got potatoes, carrots, baby carrots, cabbages, rhubarb, zucchinis, there'll be a few tomatoes, cooking apples. That's about all we've got at the moment. We've had a real bad year, just the way the weather has been.
Real Journeys resumed its Milford Sound cruises today and has increased its capacity by about 40% in Doubtful Sound, so visitors can still enjoy a Fiordland experience. Its general manager, Paul Norris, says the company would expect to get up to 1,000 people a day when the weather is good during peak summer season. He says instead there have only been about 300 visitors today across all flight companies.
It adds a level of uncertainty, and not just for our company, but obviously for the tourists that are in the region. I mean, clearly Milford Sound is one of those iconic destinations that tourists come to New Zealand to visit. So in that respect, it's obviously disappointing when customers can't access the road to get through to Milford Sound.
But he says tourism operators have been kept in the loop about any road developments. The Department of Conservation says Fiordland remains under a state of emergency, but some parts of the region and Mount Aspiring National Park are open for visitors. DOC staff are assessing the situation on the ground, with expectations they would have a clearer picture by tomorrow. It's focusing on getting the Milford track up and running again before checking Milford roadside tracks and other walks in the region. Southland Civil Defence Controller Angus McKay says the situation is improving.
I went for a fly on Wednesday and, there was a lot of water everywhere. And Thursday I went for another flyover and the water receded dramatically. So on the ground itself, things are beginning to recover. But we've not got this assessment of what's the damage to paddocks, what's the damage to fences, what's the long-term impacts from that floodwater going across the ground and through properties.
Fonterra's Southland Otago Regional Head, Mark Robinson, says it's a tough time for farmers who are still discovering damage and working out any stock losses.
We certainly have reports of farmers being unable to milk because the sheds are out of action and so on, but the community's rallying around those farmers and the cows are being milked in neighbouring sheds and so on, which is pretty cool to see.
The Insurance Council of New Zealand confirms some claims have been lodged, but says it's too early to tell the full extent of the damage. Rain is forecast for Southland and Fiordland later this week. Met Service meteorologist Peter Little says it shouldn't be any cause for concern.
At this stage, it actually doesn't look like there's going to be a lot of rain for those regions, which is good news. Particularly Southland could see some rain on Thursday, but it doesn't look like the accumulations will amount to much.
While the sun's out in Southland, the flood recovery efforts are far from over. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tēnei.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, more disruption tonight for South Auckland train commuters as work on a fire-damaged signal box continues. Bob Jones's defamation trial kicks off at the High Court in Wellington. And the latest from the Oscars, where Taika Waititi has today won an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. For Jojo Rabbit, Joaquin Phoenix has just won the Oscar for Best Actor for The Joker. Renee Zellweger, Best Actress for Judy. And Best Picture went to Parasite. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. A lot of it coming in about Concert FM. You can get in touch via text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is, well, time for the headlines with Susanna.
The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says the party will review its arrangements for party donations. The party is facing a serious fraud office investigation after the Electoral Commission concluded donations to its foundation were not properly declared. The Commission began looking into its funding structure late last year after reports by RNZ and staff. A Samoan national says he was brought to New Zealand for horticulture work, then was beaten and wasn't paid for the entire 17 months he was here. A 65-year-old man is standing trial for slavery in Napier. Joseph Matamata is facing 24 charges of human trafficking and slavery between 1994 and 2017, involving 13 people. The Prime Minister says she is determined that New Zealand will not lose RNZ Concert on FM. RNZ is planning to replace the classical music station with a new station aimed at reaching a wider, younger audience. A group of lawyers working on behalf of orchestras is preparing a legal challenge to the proposed changes. Former Culture and Heritage Minister Chris Finlayson QC is one of those involved and told Checkpoint he thinks the procedure is a stuff-up and that RNZ Concert provides an important service to all New Zealanders, including young people. Taika Waititi has won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay for his movie Jojo Rabbit. In his speech, the New Zealand filmmaker dedicated the award to the original storytellers. The movie was nominated for 6 Academy Awards and has just lost out on Best Picture to the movie Parasite. A tramper has been reported missing in Mount Aspiring National Park, where 2 people were found dead in the Makarora River on Friday and Saturday. A police spokesperson says the woman failed to turn up for an appointment this morning, but the missing persons report doesn't appear to be connected to the 2 deaths. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Time for the business news now with Emma Hatton. Hi, Emma. Shall we start off with Contact Energy posting a meagre half-year profit? What's going on there?
Yes, Lisa. So our biggest power companies' profits tumbling 78% in their half-year report out today. For the 6 months to December, the net profit was $59 million. That's down from a record $279 million last year. Last year, however, that profit was boosted by $180 million worth of one-off gains from asset sales. The company knew that repeating that profit was going to be challenging. Difficulty added there with a scarcity in natural gas supplies in the last 6 months. Supplies for gas also disrupted in the last year, so the company's basically had to pay to get gas when and where it could, and that turbulence has affected its profit. Its chief executive saying today that its big remaining gas-fired station is basically on borrowed time and it's going to speed up the development of a geothermal field to replace it.
What about New Zealand retailers? Obviously, coronavirus is an issue for some of them and they're going to have to make some changes. What kind of changes?
Yes, so we've heard from the sector today from Retail NZ. Its members, a third of its members, are reporting being negatively impacted by the coronavirus. So these members, the third, they can typically be sort of classified as those who rely A, on foot traffic, and B, on international visitors. So we're talking souvenir shops, duty-free shops, airport shops, places which particularly cater for Chinese tourists. So big sort of honey sales, things like that are examples that were given to us. Obviously that Chinese market, that's because the visitor numbers have dropped off there. These types of companies are reporting that they've had to cut back staff hours, so some of its staff aren't able to work as much as they were before. They're also not ordering as much in advance, so their forward orders are sort of slowing down. Obviously that makes sense when you think if the sales just aren't going to be there, then they're not going to order in a whole bunch of stock. They're also reporting some concerns about supply chains, obviously those again who import from China. And they're starting to shop around, look at some alternatives for where they're going to start getting their product from if this is going to be a long-term thing. Greg Harford, so he's the Chief Executive of Retail NZ, he says there's what they call medium-term concerns. So if this persists, they're going to have to look for some more sustainable alternatives. So things like if they're cutting the staff hours and they let staff go, maybe not being able to replace them anytime soon. Also interesting in news just that came to us this afternoon was from the MCK Group, which is the Millennium and Copthorne Hotel Group in New Zealand. They estimate they've actually lost in the last few weeks between $2 to $3 million in booking reservation cancellation. So that's bookings, obviously people who were visiting New Zealand who were going to stay, who haven't been able to visit now because of that coronavirus stopping them from coming into the country. So really starting to see the impacts of that for our local businesses.
Shall we take a quick trot around the markets, Emma? What are the numbers looking like?
Yes, let's trot. The NZX Top 50 index fell 58 points, about 0.5%, trimming its losses there to close just above 11,700. The New Zealand dollar is buying 64.1 US cents, 95.6 Australian and 49.7 British pence.
Thanks, Emma. That's Emma Hatton joining us from our Wellington studio with a business update this afternoon. A lawyer representing a woman on trial for murdering her abusive partner says she was entitled to protect herself. Karen Ann Riddell is on trial for murdering her partner Joseph Ngāpera in their Manurewa home in 2018. She admits stabbing Ngāpera but says she was doing it to defend herself and her son from his violence. Our court reporter Annika Smith filed this report.
After a big night out in Manurewa, Karen Riddell and her partner Joseph Ngāpera headed home to their Thompson Terrace address. An hour and a half later, Riddell's son found Ngāpera unresponsive on the floor with 2 stab wounds to his chest. Crown Prosecutor Chris Howard said she was in the lounge when police arrived.
Ms Riddell was described as acting erratically, suddenly switching moods from hysterical crying to aggression. She asked Constable Richard Parisi, "Is Joseph gone?" And when Constable Parisi replied, "Yes," Ms Riddell was heard saying, "Thank you, Jesus."
Today, the jury heard Riddell was granted a protection order against Ngāpera in July 2016. He breached this order a year later, chasing her out of the house and threatening to bottle her. But by the time Ngāpera died, the protection order had been discharged at Riddell's own request. Mr Howard said she told police the stabbing wasn't premeditated, that Ngāpera had lunged at her that night, despite her telling him to stop.
Detective Kinsey then heard Ms Riddell say, "I just murdered someone I loved so much."
Riddell's defence lawyer Shane Cassidy told the jury his client killed the man she loved, but she wasn't guilty of murder. He said she'd called out for her adult son for help that night while arguing with Ngāpera. But he said it was her 14-year-old that came running instead, shoving Ngāpera in the chest.
Karen instinctively picked up what was near, a knife on the dining table, put herself between her child and her partner and stabbed Joseph twice in the chest.
Mr Cassidy said his client loved Ngāpera and despite the violence wanted to marry him.
She killed, in effect, the man that she loved. but she did not want or intend for him to die.
Mr Cassidy said what was going through his client's mind in this split second would be critical to the jury's deliberations.
What was on her mind when she caused his death was her son. The defence say to you in those circumstances, given what she knew of Joseph, that she was entitled to protect herself and, more importantly perhaps, her son.
The trial before Justice Palmer and a jury is set down for 2 weeks. Ātui te ko ti matua ko Annika Smith-Aho.
South Auckland train commuters are facing more disruption tonight as work on a fire-damaged signal box continues. Trains between Newmarket and Penrose ground to a halt this morning, extending some travel times by about half an hour. Our reporter Katie Doyle joins us from Britomart with the latest. Hi Katie, what's the situation like there now?
Well, it's quite quiet at the moment, but as you said, commuters will be facing further disruption this evening. Now, that Newmarket Penrose line remains closed. That was closed early this morning due to a fire in a signal box. Now, Kiwi Rail had teams on site working to fix that signal box. However, excessive smoke and water damage meant that was prolonged.
And so do you think a lot of people there have got the message about potential delays and are not simply not turning up to take the train?
That could be it. I mean, there is lots of signage around tonight saying what the delays are, but I've actually got them here now. Now, the Western line, that's running at 10-minute intervals. However, customers travelling to Newmarket and Parnell are being urged to get on that Western line. Now, the Eastern line is running at a lesser frequency, that's every 20 minutes. Here's where it gets a little bit confusing. Now, the Southern line will be running along the Eastern line tonight to Otahuhu, but those travelling to Remuera, Ellerslie and Green Lane are being told to take the bus. Now, the Onehunga line, that will be travelling between Onehunga and Penrose tonight. Commuters, though, can find all of this on Auckland Transport's website.
And is Auckland Transport saying anything more about the investigation into what caused all of this?
Not at the moment. The investigation is ongoing. However, Kiwi Rail have said they are trying to get that signal box back up and running by tonight so that hopefully commuters won't face disruption tomorrow morning.
Thanks, Katie. That's Katie Doyle joining us live there from Britomart with the latest on those train disruptions. And as she said, they will all be online if you want to check them out for your trip home. The first day of the defamation trial taken by Sir Bob Jones has kicked off at the Wellington High Court to a packed gallery. It relates to a petition by filmmaker Renee Maihi, who called for Sir Robert's knighthood to be revoked after he said that Waitangi Day should be replaced with Māori Gratitude Day in an NBR column in 2018. In his column, Sir Bob Jones said Māori should bring Pākehā breakfast in bed and weed their gardens out of gratitude for existing, which his defence claims was satire. Mediana Johnson was in court and filed this report.
Supporters sung a waiata as Renee Maihi made her way into the Wellington High Court. Not far behind her was Sir Bob Jones, who, when asked what he hoped to achieve with the court case, told reporters he was learning a recipe about a new way to cut carrots and called it a bloody stupid question. In his opening remarks, Sir Bob Jones's lawyer, Fletcher Pilditch, says his client has been a prolific author and has been published in almost every paper in New Zealand.
Typically, the plaintiff's writing is humorous. Often they've been designed to provoke comment or encourage readers to take themselves less seriously. The plaintiff subscribes to the belief that laughter is the best medicine and never take life too seriously.
Mr Pilditch says Maihi's petition made serious and offensive allegations and spurred a hate campaign against his client. The meaning of racism and hate speech, for which there is currently no legal definition, has already raised its head. Pilditch says hate speech laws are not intended to protect people from offence, but says he expects the defence team may have different views on how hate speech and racism is defined. The first of the witnesses for the plaintiff was Sir Bob Jones himself, who talked about his close relationships with Māori.
I have numerous married friends. My oldest living friend, going back to 1958, is Sir Tiffany O'Regan. For a period of 15 years when at Turangi, I always fished with a local Maori mate who, being self-employed with staff, fished with me without exception every day I was there.
Sir Bob Jones says he has supported numerous charities which have helped Māori, including setting up a women's refuge in Blenheim in the 80s and sitting on the National Council for the Women's Refuge for 12 years. He says he gave Renee Maihi multiple chances to stop repeating her defamatory remarks before taking legal action.
Despite my lifelong involvement with writing, I have enormous difficulty expressing the sheer degree of anger I feel about Maihi's unforgivable and disgraceful personal attention-seeking efforts at my expense.
Renee Maihi's petition currently has 90,000 signatures. Her lawyer, Davy Salmon, is cross-examining Sir Robert on the over 50 columns he has previously written. The trial is set down for 2 weeks. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
The government has announced a campaign to vaccinate the lost generation of New Zealanders who helped spur the measles epidemic. It wants to reach about 350,000 people aged between 15 to 29 who have low rates of immunity. But experts say there was a massive sign the catch-up was needed just 2 years ago, and if officials had listened, the outbreak could have been prevented. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
About 370,000 people were given the measles, mumps, rubella vaccination last year as health officials scrambled to contain a measles outbreak that spread around the country. But many of those were not from the group of young adults that still leaves New Zealand vulnerable to another hit. The Associate Health Minister, Julianne Genter, says last year the immunisation priorities were slightly different.
In the midst of the outbreak, we had to prioritise the people who are most vulnerable, and we had to make sure there was enough for all of the babies because they are the ones who are most likely to be hospitalised or be severely ill.
15 to 29-year-olds have low MMR vaccination rates, largely because of big gaps in the health information systems and registers around the time they were children. In 2017, it was the same group contracting mumps in an outbreak centred in Auckland. Vaccinologist Helen Pertussis-Harris says she remembers doctors and others in the system almost begging for a targeted MMR campaign at the time. Some noted that the situation would be worse if measles ever arrived.
Well, given we were given clues over 20 years, that was the last clue we were given, and that was in 2017. That was about the biggest clue that could possibly have been dropped. And then, of course, after that, we did indeed see our measles epidemic.
The director of Auckland University's Immunisation Advisory Centre, Nikki Turner, says it may be late, but it's good to see the group being targeted now.
The immunity gap was known, and it has been put up for funding previously in the past. Now, in my world, that's frustrating, but equally you recognise that people are tossing up their health decisions all the time, and in this case, we missed out and we shouldn't have, and it's really unfortunate.
Though they're not as vulnerable to serious harm from the disease as under fives, as long as they're unimmunised, there's a big gap where measles or mumps could take hold again. Dr Turner says the catch-up campaign is crucial to helping to protect all New Zealanders.
Measles is an international viral problem at the moment. It's huge. We can't stop the imports, but what we can try and stop is them spreading through the New Zealand community. So this is one important gap in protection in the New Zealand community.
She says the relatively strong childhood immunisation rate has slipped, particularly among tamariki Māori. She'd also like to see more resources committed to that. Auckland's Medical Officer of Health, William Ranger, says the 15 to 29 group targeted today is notoriously difficult to reach. They're relatively well, so don't go to their GPs as much, and most have left school. He says to find them, DHBs will need to talk to their communities
and take advice on where are the best places to find these people and take the vaccination to them. So it would be community centres, sports clubs, marae, as the Minister said.
Ms Genter says the vaccine's been ordered from overseas and is expected to arrive in April. $23 million will be divided among DHBs, who will decide how to reach the elusive 15 to 29s. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
It's about 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. If you are caught up in those train delays, let us know what it's like out there. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Returning now to the Oscars and Taika Waititi's win for Best Adapted Screenplay for his film Jojo Rabbit. He missed out on Best Picture, that instead going to the South Korean film Parasite. At the ceremony was the film's producer and Taika's wife, Chelsea Winstanley, who joins me now from Los Angeles. Hi, Chelsea. Was it an amazing night for you guys?
Hi, kia ora. We've got Taika here as well with us.
Kia ora. All right.
Kia ora. Congratulations. How are you feeling?
Thank you.
Pretty crazy.
That's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah, what was it like going up there in front of all those people?
Horrible.
He did a great job.
You did a
Horrible.
fantastic
Everything
job.
that you think you're going to say, you forget, and then you're just standing there, and then you just want to get off as fast as possible.
So you're telling me as an actor and a writer and a director you had a bit of nervous panic there?
It was more. It wasn't really nerves. I could have stood up there silently for a long time, but it's just I'm not usually lost for words, and that was one of those rare moments. My brain didn't work.
So have you got the little golden statue with you right now?
No, somewhere. I left it somewhere.
You did not.
Under lock and key already.
You lost it like your mum. Have you found mum yet?
Mum somewhere. I've still got to find my mum. I'll find my mum first, then I'll find that statue.
So in all seriousness, what does it mean to you to win this?
Well, it's for me, it's a recognition of 10 years of making this film. I wrote it in 2010. And then it took a long time to get it made, and then to have this, it's and also because it's writing, which is the thing that I don't really put myself out there so much as a writer. It makes me feel like maybe I'm just going to say I'm a writer now.
You wouldn't have had a chance to see, but the Los Angeles Times is running with the headline that you are the first Māori man to win an Oscar. You had a shout out for Indigenous kids. What would you like to say to them?
Is that true? I don't know. I need to do some research.
Keisha Castle Hughes was the first Māori woman.
Yeah.
She was nominated, but Taika, you definitely are the first Māori to win.
Oh, that's fantastic.
We're talking about New Zealand. Hi, New Zealand!
This is Victoria Alonso.
New Zealand! We have Academy Award winners here!
You are winners, and you dedicated some of your speech to Indigenous children. Have you got a message for them?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's just keep going. Like, I think we all know growing up in New Zealand, it's different now, but when we were kids, it was a harder thing to get into the arts and to be taken seriously when there's a certain age when you're told to put down your pens and stop writing stories and start doing real world subjects. And I've never really agreed with that, and my parents have never agreed with that either. And I'm really thankful to them for encouraging me to pursue the arts.
I know everyone says it's a great honour to be nominated and everything, but winning's pretty cool too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's cool.
So what are your plans for the rest of the evening?
I need to eat some food.
Yeah, now the pressure's off. The pressure's over and everyone can relax and have a good time and just celebrate everyone. There's so many Kiwis here tonight that were nominated. It's an amazing feat for so many Kiwis, and we've got so many people to be thankful for. We didn't get here on our own, that's for sure,
Yeah.
There are so many. Our industry is incredible. It's made up of so many wonderful, talented people that paved the way for us to be here. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants, like literally, and this is just unreal.
So Chelsea, you say the pressure's off now. Were you really on the edge of your seat through the ceremony, holding your breath?
I mean, for sure, not really until the very end. When you've got your category that's coming up. So it's just such an exciting thing to be a part of. You just want to celebrate everybody's hard work in every category. So it actually was a really great night. It was really fun. The performances were amazing.
And it went fast. And here's to Parasite.
Yes, to Parasite.
Yeah, Bong Joon-ho is like my favourite. I love that guy, and so couldn't be happier for him.
Hey, it's a cruel question. It's a cruel question on the back of such a fantastic victory, but what next for you guys?
Food.
Food. I'm making 2 Persian films. Taika's going to Australia to make some more sauce.
And Taika, after you get some food, what next?
Sleep.
Hey, well, congratulations to you both for a fantastic win and an amazing movie. We're all very proud of you back here. Have a lovely, lovely evening, and thank you for taking time out to talk to us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Have a great day, everyone.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Well, that was Taika Waititi and Chelsea Winstanley, hot off the win at the Oscars there, and heading out to get some much-deserved food. The Labour Party isn't committing to any coalition partners ahead of this year's election, despite the Māori Party wanting the two to work together. The Māori Party supported the previous national government for 3 terms on confidence and supply, but found itself turfed out of Parliament at the last election. Now, its president, Shea Wilson, says it's listening to its supporters, who he says lean more towards Labour. Here's our political reporter, Charlie Drever.
Māori Party President Shea Wilson has made it clear who he and potential voters want the party to collaborate with this election.
We're clear that our people align more to Labour, and so we are open to having a conversation with Labour. If we ever do talk to National, it'll have to be a big deal for us to move that way again. The perception and the reputation by aligning with National affected us.
He was asked why those on the Māori roll should vote for the Māori Party instead of just voting for Labour.
If you're voting for Labour, you're voting for Labour, and all you're doing is promoting the same stuff where they want to try and lift everyone up, but you actually have to do something different. You've got to lift the lowest first to ensure that we can go forward, and Labour doesn't do that. Labour focuses on equality rather than equity.
As it's almost certain not to reach the 5% party vote threshold, the Māori Party will need at least 1 seat to get to Parliament, let alone the negotiating table. Labour currently holds all 7 Māori electorate seats, and the Prime Minister says the plan is to keep all of them. Ms Ardern says the party is focusing on its own success rather than throwing a lifeline to the Māori Party.
We have consistently run in the Māori seats against the Māori Party. That is not new, and what will remain absolutely the same is that we will campaign hard for a strong Labour vote, for our Labour candidates to return, because we have made good progress on behalf of those constituents in the Māori seats.
Meanwhile, National's political options are narrowing. Leader Simon Bridges has already ruled out working with New Zealand First, and the Māori Party has declared its preference. That leaves National with ACT, and a lot fewer friends than Labour to form a government. Simon Bridges is shrugging off the snub.
The Māori Party should go with the party in government that it thinks it's going to get the best deal in terms of its policies and kaupapa. And, it's very early days on all of these things.
At Taratana, before Mr Wilson made his position clear, Mr Bridges had said the two parties had worked well together in the past. But now he says he won't be trying to win back the affections of the Māori Party.
We're not going to do any sort of coalition negotiations before the election. The way to get a national-led government is to vote national, but clearly there's other options out there in what's going to be a very close election.
With the Māori Party having lost all its seats in 2017, this election will be crucial in determining the future of the party. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
A bit of time for your feedback before the news at 6 on concert, and RNZ plans to shake that up. Nick from Titirangi says, we have bigger problems in the world than the future of Concert FM, for goodness sake, ! Someone else, though, says, mutiny, good on you guys, long live Concert. Another one says, keep the concert program exactly as it is, outrageous to do otherwise.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. The Prime Minister is holding off making any judgments about New Zealand First's donations until the Serious Fraud Office delivers its conclusion. The party is facing an SFO investigation after the Electoral Commission concluded donations to its foundation were not properly declared. Winston Peters says New Zealand First has acted in line with other parties, but admits he advised his party to refer itself to the police last week to seek clarity. Jacinda Ardern says she has not asked Mr Peters to stand down. The lawyer for the man facing 24 human trafficking and slavery charges has urged the jury to keep an open mind about the case. The Crown has argued that 65-year-old Joseph Matamata lured 13 Samoan nationals to New Zealand with promises of lucrative horticultural work in Hawke's Bay, but on arrival treated them like slaves. It says he withheld wages, locked them up in his home, and issuing threats and physical abuse when chores weren't completed. Mr Matamata's lawyer, Roger Phillip, told the court his client never deceived any of the workers in Samoa and never enslaved them in New Zealand.
This is a trial really about an extended Samoan family and their relationships and how the cultural context of service, assistance, obligation match in with these particular charges.
The Crown will call its first witness tomorrow. Sir Robert Jones has told the High Court in Wellington a petition calling for his knighthood to be revoked spurred a hate campaign against him. The millionaire businessman has brought a defamation case against Renee Maihi, who started the petition after Sir Robert wrote a column calling for a day where Māori did household tasks for Pākehā out of gratefulness for existing. The trial started in the High Court at Wellington today. Sir Robert says he gave Ms Maihi multiple chances to stop repeating the defamatory remarks in the media.
Despite my lifelong involvement with writing, I have enormous difficulty expressing the sheer degree of anger I feel about Maihi's unforgivable and disgraceful personal attention-seeking efforts at my expense.
Sir Robert Jones. The trial is set down for 2 weeks. Parasite has won Best Picture at the Academy Awards, beating Taika Waititi and Chelsea Winstanley's Jojo Rabbit. The South Korean thriller was the big winner on the night, collecting 4 awards, including Best Director, Best International Feature Film and Best Original Screenplay. Director Bong Joon-ho, picking up the Best Director trophy, paid tribute to his fellow nominee.
Thank you so much. When I was young and studying cinema, there was a saying that I carved deep into my heart, which is the most personal is the most creative.
That quote was from our great Martin Scorsese.
Parasite director Bong Joon-ho. Elsewhere, Joaquin Phoenix won Best Actor for his role in Joker, and Renee Zellweger won Best Actress for Judy. Taika Waititi won Best Adapted Screenplay for Jojo Rabbit. Former Culture and Heritage Minister Chris Finlayson says the decision by RNZ to strip its concert channel of its FM frequency is a complete stuff-up. RNZ is planning to take the classical music station off the FM frequency and replace it with a new youth-oriented station. But Mr Finlayson told Checkpoint the concert station doesn't just cater to older people.
It is not the preserve of the wrinklies. It is something that provides a wonderful service to all New Zealanders. And so I certainly hope that the Prime Minister will do something about it, because this is a complete stuff-up.
Chris Finlayson says RNZ's board chair and chief executive need to front up and explain their decision. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says she will fight to keep RNZ concert on an FM frequency. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 6. The White Ferns have clinched the T20 series against South Africa after a magnificent century from captain Sophie Devine in Wellington. It was Devine's first century at the international T20 level, and she did it with the support of the only other White Fern to get a ton in this format, Susie Bates. Together they helped amass 171 for 2. The White Ferns then dismissed South Africa for 102 after 17 overs and now hold an unassailable 3-1 series lead. The 5th and final T20 is on Thursday in Dunedin. Black Caps veteran Tim Southee says bowling when he felt ill on the weekend was pretty tough, but says he didn't want to let his teammates down. New Zealand beat India in Auckland on Saturday to clinch the 3-match ODI series. Leading a young seam attack, Southee fought through a gastrobug to claim 2 key wickets and return the most economical figures of the New Zealand bowlers. Southee was feeling better today.
Illness is something that I guess you just have to cope with as well. But it was pretty tough. But once you sort of made that commitment to playing, you sort of had to find a way to I guess not let your teammates down and just crack on and try and do a job for the guys.
Tim Southey, tomorrow's match in Mount Maunganui is a dead rubber. The LPGA Tour, the elite women's professional golf circuit, is cancelling tournaments in Thailand and Singapore later this month due to the coronavirus outbreak in China, which has killed more than 900 people. It has had a major impact on the sports calendar in Asia. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Breachu Kaibu, one of Scotland's finest young folk singers. She's in the studio with us for a sofa session. There's panic in Bulgaria, where thousands of parents have been taking kids out of school, afraid their children will be abducted by an international illegal adoption ring. And Charlie King makes his debut as our latest sports correspondent. On the line from Darwin, Australia, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for the whole of the North Island. Fine weather, apart from a few areas of cloud tomorrow morning, and in Wellington and Wairarapa tomorrow evening. Isolated showers about the Gisborne Ranges during the afternoons and evenings. Southland and Clutha, fine inland but cloudy periods about the coast with possible light showers there tomorrow. For the remainder of the South Island, fine apart from areas of cloud tomorrow morning. Cloud increasing in Canterbury and Marlborough tomorrow night. Chatham Islands mostly cloudy with occasional showers. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Prime Minister has made it clear she will fight to keep RNZ Concert on an FM frequency. Jacinda Ardern has expressed frustration at RNZ pushing ahead with announcing proposed changes to its concert radio station when the government had asked for time to discuss alternatives. Earlier this afternoon, she told reporters that as the Arts and Culture Minister, she wanted to improve access to the arts.
I've made it very clear that I am determined that we are not going to lose RNZ Concert on FM. Cabinet today decided to look at what would be involved in ensuring that is the case. From here, our expectation is that a Cabinet paper will be prepared which lays out what would be involved in freeing up the 102 FM frequency. That spectrum has been shelved for the last 20 years for the purpose of providing youth-targeted programming, something that many in this arena will be familiar with since 1999. In the meantime, we believe Radio New Zealand has New Zealand On Air funding obligations to continue programming until June, and we intend to use the time available to work constructively to find a solution. Our initial advice has been that they contractually are obliged to continue to provide that service. That's the advice that we've received. So our view is that gives us some time to work constructively together. I don't believe that they would wish to lose an audience who feels so passionately about that service, and we think there's a way through where they can both grow their audience for younger listeners whilst retaining their existing one. Some of these decisions are happening within the context of Radio New Zealand having seen a boost in their funding, roughly in the order of $10 million. I will flag that that was much needed in our view, that they hadn't received the funding required to keep pace with the obligations on them as a public broadcaster, that they see the need to broaden out who they're reaching as part of their public broadcasting mandate. But some of the strength of feeling I'm hearing at the moment is access, which does very much come back to the issue of the frequency. Some of those other matters, they tell us that they are very genuine in the fact that it is a consultation. And so I'm sure they'll be listening to the views of those who are amongst their listenership currently when it comes to other programming matters. It would not be appropriate for us to interfere in programming decisions, and keeping in mind, of course, that exists for good reason. It would be totally inappropriate for the government of the day to take a position on the editorial line of Radio New Zealand. But the decision here that's being made around removal of a service from frequency, I think it steps into a very different realm around the structure of Radio New Zealand and goes to the heart of another issue that 20 years ago we were looking to resolve around freeing up frequency for youth radio. So I see that as more of a structural issue than simply an operational one, and one that actually we may be able to help them resolve. And I would have thought, and I believe, that RNZ probably would welcome that.
This has got nothing to do with the opinions of people who past, former or present, I should add, although I can tell you there's some very strong views from the present members of the government as well. I'm the Minister for Arts, and so this for me comes to the heart of my portfolio. And when I came in, one of the things that I very clearly set out as a goal of our administration, our time in government, was that we increase people's access to the arts. And by that, I mean reaching more people in more parts of the country, of more age demographics, and in a way where we remove barriers, which of course often include cost. So this comes to the heart of what I consider to be at the core of what we need to achieve in the arts portfolio.
And that's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern talking about the future of Concert FM, and we've had a complete flood of feedback from you all about that issue. We hope to get to some more of that a little later in the programme. A Samoan man brought to New Zealand for horticultural work in Hawke's Bay was allegedly not paid for 17 months and was beaten if he didn't perform chores at home. The man who is charged with the crime, 65-year-old Joseph Matamata, began his trial at the High Court in Napier today. He denies 24 charges of human trafficking and slavery over a 20-year period. Anusha Bradley has been at court.
Joseph Matamata faces 13 charges of human trafficking and 11 charges of slavery between 1994 and 2017. In his opening remarks, Crown Prosecutor Clayton Walker told the jury of 6 men and 6 women that one of his alleged victims spent his 17 months working long days in the fields but didn't receive a cent. He was then locked up behind a perimeter fence around Mr Matamata's Kiwi Street home in Hastings.
He was not allowed out without permission. He was not meant to talk to others when he was at work or at church on Sundays. Much of his time when not working was spent doing chores. And if he didn't do the work or the chores to the standard required by Mr Matamata, then he would either be abused or even hit. He was hit various times by a stick, by a power cord, by secateurs, by a broom.
Clayton Walker said this worker, like the other 12 complainants, were lured to New Zealand by Mr Matamata's promise of well-paid work and a better life, and they had no reason to doubt him.
He trusted him completely because Mr Matamata was and is a matai, a Samoan chief. A matai is someone who has controlling authority, someone who commands, by virtue of the title, respect and obedience. Respect for and obedience to a matai is a fundamental part of Samoan culture.
Another of his alleged victims, who was 15 years old at the time, came to New Zealand for schooling in 1994, but ended up doing Mr Matamata's cooking and cleaning. Clayton Walker said the girl fled to Auckland after a beating by Mr Matamata, but he tracked her down and brought her back.
And he did bring her back by car with her hands and wrists tied as she was in the back of the car. And then she was placed in the storeroom for the night.
In the defence's opening statement, Mr Matamata's lawyer, Roger Phillip, urged the jury to keep an open mind until they'd heard all the evidence.
This is a trial really about an extended Samoan family and their relationships and how the cultural context of service, assistance, obligation matching with these particular charges.
And he said there must be a presumption of innocence for Mr Matamata, who has pled not guilty to all 24 charges.
The defendant has denied the charges. He denies there was any deception at all in Samoa. He denies he ever enslaved anyone here in New Zealand. So these are all matters for you to determine throughout the journey that we will all have in this trial. And so I simply ask, ladies and gentlemen, keep an open mind.
The trial before Justice Cull is set down for 5 weeks and will hear from 46 Crown witnesses from Samoa, Australia and around New Zealand. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
And it's 6:15. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The disability sector is in the grip of a funding crisis that's a tragedy waiting to happen, according to the New Zealand Disability Support Network. Its comments follow Checkpoint revealing Laura Ferguson Rehabilitation will be closing all its rehab and residential services in Auckland, Waikato and Wanganui by August, citing the Ministry of Health's refusal to provide more funding as a core reason for the closure. But the Ministry of Health says it never received any requests for extra funding from Laura Ferguson Rehabilitation and is not aware of any other disability providers in financial difficulty. New Zealand Disability Support Network CEO Dr Garth Benny says many service providers are in constant contact with the Ministry over funding shortfalls.
I was surprised at the assertion that there don't appear to be many providers experiencing financial difficulties. The reality is much different than that. The sector is in the midst of a financial crisis that has been brewing for many years, and our organisation is in weekly contact with the Ministry around a whole variety of funding issues that we have with government funding, both with the Ministry of Health and with the Ministry of Social Development, who also fund disability services.
So what does that crisis look like in real terms?
Well, what that means in practice is that providers are increasingly struggling with their own financial sustainability. They are increasingly struggling to maintain the levels of quality and safety in their services that they want to. And in that sense, we're talking about potential tragedies that are waiting to happen here.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's increasingly difficult for providers to guarantee the kinds of quality and safety that they would like to see in their services, and we see this unfolding in the kinds of discussions that providers are having with government around refusing to take some new referrals because the funding on offer simply doesn't add up, and disabled people and families, of course, are finding it increasingly difficult to access the support they need. It's a very complex system to navigate. People often end up with support packages that only contribute very partially to the actual needs that they have, and there are people on long wait lists.
So when your concern is that there could be a tragedy, what is that worst fear in reality? What would that be?
Well, I'm not going to spell out any details in that. I don't want to speculate, and I don't want to, crystal ball gaze. But I think it's important just to know that providers are increasingly finding it difficult to maintain the levels of quality and safety that they are in fact contracted to provide. And we would like to think that government had a much more of a shared risk approach here, because at the moment all the risk is sitting with providers.
But is it fair to say, Garth, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is it fair to say that you are concerned someone could die because of a lack of funding for services?
Well, ultimately that's a possibility. I'm not suggesting that's right around the corner, but certainly I am concerned about the compromises that could be made around quality and safety.
How much does the sector need, in your view?
Well, we released a paper at the end of last year where we indicated that we thought the sector was short by around $574 million. We don't expect the government to close that gap in one step, but we desperately need government to start making inroads into those funding shortfalls with the upcoming budget.
So obviously they announced significant spending in the last couple of weeks, $12 billion for infrastructure. So what do you think of that when you sit there wanting more money?
Well, the message that sends to this sector is that the government doesn't in fact have the money, but we are left wondering about government's priorities. 12 billion versus 574 million. I mean, this should be really straightforward. It's a funding crisis that has been brewing for more than a decade. And going back even further than that probably as well. So we think it's long overdue for government to step up. I also want to clarify that the additional funding that was made available in last year's budget merely covered off the deficit that the sector had run up in the previous financial year, and that deficit is looming again. So we're treading water here.
What does that shortfall of $574 million that you want, what does that translate to every day for families who need these services? What does that look like?
Well, what it means is that families and individuals with disability find accessing support increasingly complex and problematic. It's likely that they will find it difficult to navigate the system in the first place. In our report, we indicated that there are around 25% of disabled people in New Zealand who aren't getting any access at all to the services and supports that they need. Those that do enter the system often experience long delays and waits, and in the end up with support packages that are only a contribution to what they actually need.
The Ministry of Health has said categorically that it's been talking to the disability sector and is willing to work with the disability sector to help and find solutions, and it's unaware of any other provider that is going to the wall financially. So do you accept that?
I don't accept that. I find that very difficult to believe. I know that there are many providers, as I've already said, who are in fairly constant contact with the Ministry over their funding difficulties, whether that be around negotiating funding packages for particular individuals where they know the costs simply don't add up.
So how many do you think? Could you put a number on it?
I couldn't put a number on it.
And are any of them on the brink of collapse?
Providers find their way into financial difficulties through a number of different circumstances. I think there will be a small number right now who are on the brink of financial uncertainty. They will be thinking about, and I know that there are providers that are thinking about exiting whole programs, withdrawing from some contracts, as Laura Ferguson Trust has done. I know that there are providers giving serious thought to charging fees to recoup some of the costs, which is simply, that's not acceptable, but providers are left with very few options here.
How much more pressure will that place on families then if they have to find their own money to fund those services?
Well, exactly, and so providers that are considering doing that are doing so extremely reluctantly. It's around trying to find a way of providing some service as opposed to no service at all.
Well, we're a matter of months away from a budget, so what's your message?
Our overwhelming message is that it's time for government to deliver. It's time for government to take seriously the concerns of the sector. It is in crisis, and I just hope that it doesn't take a series of tragedies to wake everyone up here.
And that was Dr. Gaspeni, the CEO of New Zealand Disability Support Network. And he says there's about 40,000 New Zealanders receiving disability funding through the Ministries of Health and Social Development. And that number doesn't include people who are supported through ACC. A trip to the supermarket rarely ends without a trolley full of plastic these days, but Countdown has today kicked off a trial to keep more of its produce plastic-free. Over a tonne of plastic is estimated to be cut over the coming months, but whether cutting the packaging will end up creating more food waste remains to be seen. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blake-Person headed along to take a look.
Fruit and vegetables as nature intended, for the most part anyway.
When you come in the door, the whole entire fruit and veggie section in front of you is plastic free. So we've taken out 68 different products and repackaged them into either loose or into paper or cardboard. In the 3 stores that we're doing for 10 weeks, we've taken out 1,000 kilograms of plastic for 10 weeks. So it's quite a big change.
Countdown today kicked off a 10-week trial to cut plastic from its produce department. Its General Manager, Corporate Affairs, Safety and Sustainability, Kerry Hannafin, says it hasn't been as simple as just removing plastic from the shelves.
We didn't want plastic in the supply chain at all, so it's come in crates, obviously, into either our pack house or suppliers' pack houses. And then it's been, usually packing is automated, but we've had to do it by hand because it's gone into different packaging. So it's a massive process change in our supply chain, but also in the stores, the team have to work differently with the produce. So, yeah, it's taken, and we've had to design new packaging. So it's taken many months to get it right to make sure that we don't, create food waste or lose food along the way.
The test may or may not be worth it. While Countdown wants to do right by reducing plastic waste, it can't be at the expense of food waste, with foods like cucumbers rotting much faster without their plastic sleeves.
We don't know how it's going to last. It does tend to, last a lot longer, like weeks in plastic. We think it might get a few days out of it here, so we're worried about that. Tomatoes and mushrooms, we don't know how that's going to work in terms of they'll be loose in cartons and how will that work in the trolley and online, but we're going to give it a go. We're doing something that's cool and good and right, but I don't want to create something that's going to be harmful at the same time. That would be just a disaster. And food waste, food in the landfill, it rots, it creates methane, and methane's incredibly damaging to the climate. So that's what we're mostly worried about, is too much waste.
But among the loose apples and cardboard punnet tomatoes, loose leaves, soft berries and herbs remain stubbornly stuck in plastic.
So we've got plastic with a plastic fork fruit. Is that something that kind of meets the test for naked packaging?
So we did our best. There's a few, things that are lagging behind, but we kind of, we needed to keep a few things in just, I guess, because of the high demand. We sell so much of them, it's very convenient for lunch.
In addition to the now bagless grapes and the plastic-free lettuces, one of the biggest differences you'll notice about this store is that there are no longer the lightweight plastic bags that used to come on the big rolls and you'd rip them off and put your produce into them. Today, customers are being offered these lightweight bags, reusable, 3 for $3, but perhaps somewhat ironically, they themselves are made out of plastic. And while it's a small step in the scheme of plastic-free products, customers say it's a move in the right direction.
I think that where it's possible to get rid of plastic, I think all industry should be trying to do so, and it wouldn't be my choice then to buy that or not buy that. I do need prawns though, and they do have to be in plastic.
If anything, it's better. I would be encouraging people to be using paper, definitely. Is it a hassle? Not at all. It's a mindset and it's a habit. You've got to form that habit, and once you form the habit, it's easy.
So I still think there's too much plastic in the supermarkets, for sure.
I would have liked to have had some of those little brown bags as a step to buying these, because otherwise you're a bit confused to begin with, I think. It's all gradual steps, isn't it? Like, for example, I've changed to using soap rather than body wash in a plastic container. So yeah, little steps we all have to make.
But the change from plastic doesn't come cheap. It's cost Countdown around $500,000 just for its Ponsonby, Orewa and Manukau stores. To roll that out across all 182 supermarkets will certainly add up, but it will ultimately come down to what customers want.
I've been really upfront about the fact that there is some plastic remaining in our store, but most of it's gone, and where it remains, we've tried to tell our customers about the why, and if the feedback's really strong about it, then we'll look at it again. There's so much more to do.
For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
And if you were listening to that on the drive home, Nita and Nick's piece will go up on our Facebook page and website. You can check out the pictures there. So much feedback on concert. So let's get started. I'll try and get through as much as I can before the headlines. And this person says, axing concert would be like burning books. Just because you don't like our culture doesn't mean you should be able to kill it. Another one in the same vein, concert program should stay as it is. And this, short-sighted of RNZ to think that they're going to open up a network for young people and young people are going to listen. You are turning away from 170,000 listeners towards something that really doesn't exist yet. Young people stream music they listen to, Spotify and other platforms, including YouTube. Get it right, RNZ. You sound like a bunch of boomers. Someone else from the far north, Odette's got in touch to say, I am in the age group the youth channel would be aimed at, and I have spent many hours listening to the classical channel on behalf of all the young classical musicians. Please keep it as it is. Another person says the PM is bang on the money. No need for a youth channel. What a joke. Youth channel would be better suited to advanced streaming services. And this one, people who call classical music elitist are simply flat out ignorant and wrong and won't even bother to find out otherwise because they have just decided for themselves that they don't want to know. That's Charlotte from Wellington. And this one, concert versus youth. Concert FM, please. Ironically, I listened to concert when younger and less so go now. I look forward to more hours when I retire. I hope concert will still be there. This person says, I don't like being told their culture is superior to mine when I buy or rent music. The concert FM changes are fine. That's one in a whole big list. This person says there are a number of channels already available for the youth that is willing to play pop, rock, punk and hip-hop. There is only one, in capital letters, station for classical music. I cannot see the rationale for closing Concert FM. Surely there has to be a refuge for people who need that calm music. This one says, being over 60 and feeling marginalised right now. Catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister says she won't make judgments about New Zealand First's donations until the Serious Fraud Office delivers its conclusion. The lawyer of the man facing 24 charges of human trafficking and slavery has urged the jury to keep an open mind. The former Culture and Heritage Minister says the proposed changes to RNZ's classical music station are a complete stuff-up. And Taika Waititi has made history as the first person of Māori descent to win an Oscar. He says young Indigenous children should just keep going if they want to pursue the arts. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
There were a number of people who were blocked from reaching the departure lounge and therefore were unable to make it onto this flight.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
Where there used to be